The state of African economies continues to generate a lot of discussion in seminars and books. There seems to be no shortage of theories on why the continent lags behind other regions of the world economically, and many Africans are searching for realistic strategies that will lift the continent out of poverty. Bad policy choices by African leaders and lack of proper planning are cited by analysts as among reasons why the continent remains the poorest in the world. A noted South African scholar, Greg Mills, discusses Africa's economic state in his new book, Why Africa is Poor and What Africans Must Do About It. He blames the African leaders, but also takes issue with citizens and donors.
But I also think that the choices have been enabled by African electorates, which have remained very passive in the face of some of the most egregious leadership we've seen across the continent. And they've also been enabled by the acts of donors, which have allowed African leadership to externalize its problems and also externalize its solutions, to make them somebody else's responsibility.
Mills says over the years, foreign aid has been an excuse for African leaders not to plan for development of their countries, with funding from Western nations seen as a panacea for Africa's problems.
$500 billion of money has been spent on aid projects in Africa, yet Africa is today no richer than it was at independence 50 years ago in per capita terms. And that is illustrative of nothing else, that aid is not necessarily the way to grow your economy.
Some African policymakers share Mills' perspective on aid. Professor Beno Ndulu, governor of the Bank of Tanzania, agrees that Africa's economic transformation will take much more than what foreign aid can provide.
We have ultimately got to start again being smart in how we tap into different sources of finance. The private sector ultimately has to be given much more space to do a lot more than we have allowed the sector to do.
Ndulu, who participated in a seminar on public investment management, says Africa can learn a lot from the development of China and other Asian countries.
Countries like China, etc., are big, successful countries. The world respects those, and that opens a whole new door for us to try new things.
Professor Tang Min, a Chinese development official, explains what has enabled China to attain to its current economic might.
I think number one is what we call the opening up and reforms. Second is political stability. And thirdly is what we discussed, infrastructure, because you have a relatively good infrastructure, then you can attract the more investment, not only foreign investment, also domestic investment.
Tang says that although China has not been a democratic country in the past 30 years, it is much more open today, and its people have much more freedom to engage in discussion relating to policy and life. Mills says real democracy is critical to Africa's growth and outlines what the continent must do to grow.
We have a very young population. We have a huge demographic dividend to benefit from. We have comparative advantages in natural resources and in agriculture and also in tourism, and we have to manage those better. We need to really champion business as the engine of growth.
Greg Mills says African countries should focus less on their colonial past in favor of leadership and policy as a means to economic expansion.